Deep beneath an American city, sewer workers found something they were never meant to see: a massive nest pulsing with life. 4 days later, what hatched forced authorities to shut down the entire city. What did they find under Brookhaven? Stay till the end to find out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. The air beneath Brookhaven was always thick, a humid mix of rust, sewage, and silence that could make any man uneasy. But for Inspector Mark Davis, the sewers were familiar territory. He'd worked for the sanitation department for 16 years, crawling through every tunnel, valve chamber, and drainage pipe the city had to offer. Nothing ever truly surprised him anymore. Until that morning. It started with a complaint about low pressure in several central pipelines near the old industrial zone. Mark and his team, 2 maintenance workers named Leo and Ramirez, were dispatched to inspect the system. The coordinates led them deep beneath the intersection of Jefferson Avenue and Piermont Street, where decades of wastewater had carved out a labyrinth of tunnels. The deeper they went, the more the smell thickened. Mark's boots splashed through ankle-deep water as his flashlight beam danced across corroded pipes. "Pressure reading's fine now," Ramirez muttered, scanning his gauge. Whatever it was, it cleared up. Mark frowned. "Maybe. But the city doesn't call me at 5 a.m. for nothing. Let's check the junction." They turned down a narrow passage, half blocked by debris and sludge. The walls dripped with moisture, each droplet echoing faintly through the darkness. Then, as Mark rounded a corner, his light froze on something that didn't belong. A strange mound of tangled material in an alcove. It was too big for a rat nest and too organized for random trash. "Hey, Leo, get over here," Mark called, stepping closer. The closer he got, the more uneasy he felt. The structure was built from metal scraps, plastic sheets, bones, and twisted wire. At first, it looked like a bizarre pile of garbage, until his flashlight swept across the center. 5 massive leathery eggs sat nestled within the debris, each about the size of a helmet. Their surfaces glistened faintly, damp and alive. "What the hell?" Leo whispered, pulling out his phone to record. Mark knelt beside one of them, careful not to touch. It was warm. He could see faint, pulsing veins beneath the leathery shell. Something inside moved. His instincts screamed at him to back away. "Animals don't make nests like this," Ramirez muttered. "Not down here. Not in this part of the city." Mark straightened, his pulse quickening. "Get this on camera. I'm logging the coordinates." He switched on his body cam and began recording every angle. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger the longer they stayed. There was also an odd humming sound, low, rhythmic, like breathing echoing through the pipes. "This isn't any animal we know," Mark said finally. "We're reporting this right now." The team climbed back up the ladder shaft, their nerves tight. Within an hour, Mark was standing in his supervisor's office on the 3rd floor of the sanitation department, still covered in grime. His superior, Chief Wallace, leaned over the photos on the desk. "Could be alligators," Wallace said skeptically. "People dump all kinds of things down there." Mark shook his head. "Not like this. Those eggs were intact, warm. Something's alive down there. Big. We need wildlife control, maybe even the city's emergency response," Wallace sighed. "Fine. But we can't just shut down half the sewer network on a hunch. Install cameras, motion sensors. Let's see what's living under our streets before we panic." By late afternoon, a small team descended with infrared motion cameras and heavy-duty mounts. They placed 4 units around the alcove, each recording 24/7. Mark double-checked the battery packs himself. As they finished, the last bit of sunlight filtered through the entrance grating above, casting narrow beams down into the darkness. Mark felt uneasy, standing there in that humid, echoing tunnel. The eggs didn't move, but something about them felt wrong, ancient, almost intelligent. Before leaving, He took one last look at the nest. The water beneath it rippled slightly, though no one had stepped near it. "Let's go," he said, his voice lower now. "Lock this section off. No one comes down here without my clearance." Back on the surface, the city roared with life. Buses, horns, people heading to work, all unaware that just below their feet, something unnatural was quietly waiting to hatch. Mark uploaded the camera feed to the department's central server and filled out the official report, labeling the discovery as unidentified subterranean fauna, active nesting site. It was the kind of phrase that could be ignored by anyone who didn't know better. But Mark couldn't shake the image of those eggs pulsing faintly in the beam of his flashlight. That night, long after he went home, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that dark tunnel, heard that strange humming, and smelled the metallic air. Somewhere under Brookhaven, life was growing, and soon it would wake up. For the next 4 days, Brookhaven carried on as if nothing had happened. Traffic flowed, cafes buzzed, and the city's skyline glowed against the autumn haze. But beneath it all, the tunnels breathed, warm, damp, alive. Only a handful of people knew about the nest hidden deep under Jefferson Avenue, and Inspector Mark Davis was one of them. He couldn't stop thinking about it. Every morning, before heading to the office, he'd check the motion camera dashboard on his department-issued tablet. At first, everything looked normal. Just water flowing through the pipes, shadows of rats darting past the lens, occasional flickers of heat signatures from dripping valves. But by the second night, the recordings began showing something new. It started small, faint vibrations along the floor, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking closely. Then came a shape, large and slow-moving, slithering through a parallel tunnel. It wasn't human. The infrared camera captured only the outline, a long body, powerful limbs, and a tail that swept across the frame before vanishing. Mark's stomach turned as he replayed it. "That's not a raccoon," he muttered under his breath. When he brought it up to Chief Wallace, the man waved a dismissive hand. "Relax, Davis. Probably a sewer gator. They crawl in from the river all the time." "Not this size," Mark argued. "You didn't see how big those eggs were?" Wallace leaned back, sighing. "You're letting this thing get to your head. We'll send animal control down at the end of the week. Until then, let the cameras do their job." Mark didn't answer. He just nodded and left the office, feeling the weight of something wrong pressing down on him. That night, as the city settled into silence, the cameras kept rolling. Around 2:17 a.m., a deep rumbling sound echoed through the pipes, shaking the camera mounts. Something heavy was moving through the system, water sloshing violently around it. One camera's lens fogged up as a wave of heat passed through, distorting the image. A moment later, the motion sensor triggered again, this time closer. In the feed, a glistening snout emerged into view, its nostrils flaring. Then, sharp ridges along a scaled back. The creature moved with slow, deliberate power, its eyes reflecting the faint glow of the camera's infrared. It paused beside the nest, pressing its broad head toward the eggs. Then it turned to face the lens. For several seconds, the screen filled with its enormous eye, black, glossy, and ancient. Then, with a single swing of its tail, the camera went dark. The following morning, when Mark checked the feed, he found static. 3 out of 4 cameras were offline. The only one still transmitting showed faint ripples across the water and movement in the distance, small shapes darting in and out of frame. He felt a chill crawl down his spine. "They're hatching," he whispered. That same day, reports began trickling in from locals near the river. A jogger claimed she saw something massive slide into the water near the old pumping station. A fisherman swore he found shredded remains of a dog along the shore. City Hall brushed off the stories, but rumors spread fast. Online forums lit up with posts titled, "Something's living under Brookhaven," and "The sewer monster is real." Some claimed it was a mutated reptile. Others said government experiments. But for Mark, it wasn't about rumors. It was about responsibility. Those tunnels were his territory, his to keep safe. That evening, he met with his two workers, Leo and Ramirez, in the maintenance bay. "We're going back down tomorrow," he said quietly. "We need to retrieve the footage before something else destroys it." Leo frowned. "After what you showed me? You're crazy, man. That thing's huge." "I know," Mark said. "But if those eggs hatched, we need proof. The city has to see what we're dealing with. Until then, nobody's going to believe us." As they prepared their gear, a heavy rain began outside. Water thundered down the drains, flooding the lower pipes. Somewhere beneath the streets, the sound of rushing water mixed with something deeper, a low rumble, almost like a growl. Later that night, as Mark sat alone in his truck reviewing one of the partial recordings that still played, he noticed something he hadn't before. A second shadow behind the mother's form. Smaller, quicker, watching the nest from the darkness. Whatever it wasn't alone. By sunrise, the storm had passed, but the anxiety hadn't. Mark knew they couldn't wait any longer. He gathered his team, loaded the infrared monitors, and checked the safety lines twice. The air in the tunnels would be worse after the rain. Warm, humid, and perfect for whatever was living down there. As they descended into the shaft the next morning, the sound of dripping water greeted them like a heartbeat. The air was thick with decay. Somewhere ahead, something scraped against the concrete wall. Mark gripped his flashlight tighter, feeling the metal tremble slightly in his hand. "Stay close," he whispered, "and whatever happens, don't run." They moved deeper into the tunnel, unaware that the next few steps would change everything. The stench hit them first, a foul, rotting smell that clung to the damp air and burned the back of the throat. Even through their respirators, Mark and his team could barely breathe as they entered the central junction. The beam from Mark's flashlight cut through a haze of mist rising from the flooded tunnel floor. What he saw made him stop cold. The nest was gone. Where it had once stood, that grotesque mound of debris, bones, and metal, there was now only destruction. Twisted shards of rebar jutted from the walls. Scraps of leathery eggshells floated in the water like thin brown leaves. Deep claw marks scored the concrete floor. Something big had been here, and it wasn't far. "Jesus," Ramirez muttered, his voice trembling. "It's all shredded." Mark crouched near the remains, his gloved hand trembling as he picked up a piece of eggshell. The inside was slick and glistening. Warm. "They hatched," he whispered. He looked around the junction, shining his light into the side tunnels. Water rippled outward from somewhere ahead, faint waves breaking against the walls. Leo adjusted his shoulder camera, his voice shaky. "Sir, I think something's still in here." "Keep recording," Mark said firmly. "No one goes off alone." They moved carefully through the main corridor, the light from their flashlights bouncing off the slick concrete. Each footstep echoed too loudly. Every sound, every drip, every distant splash made their nerves tighten. At the far end of the tunnel, Mark spotted the camera equipment they'd installed 4 days ago. One of the tripods was bent in half, the lens smashed. The others were covered in grime and water. But the main unit, the one recording the entire chamber, was still intact. Its red indicator light blinked faintly. "Get that drive," Mark ordered. Leo pulled a portable monitor from his backpack and connected it. The video began to play, grainy but clear enough to make their stomachs twist. At first, the feed showed the same still image of the nest, quiet, motionless, water slowly dripping from the ceiling. Then, hours later, the surface of one egg began to twitch. The leathery shell flexed, then split open with a wet tear. A small, scaled snout pushed through. Another followed, then another. Within minutes, all 5 eggs had ruptured. The footage showed tiny forms slithering free, pale, reptilian, but unmistakably alligators. Their movements were jerky and fast. But before anyone could speak, the camera picked up something larger entering the frame. The creature moved slowly, almost majestically. A massive shadow emerged from the side tunnel, scales glistening, tail sweeping the water. The mother. Her body filled the entire corridor. She was easily 10 feet long, her hide mottled dark green and brown, her jaws powerful enough to crush steel. She stepped over the broken shells, her nostrils flaring as she lowered her head toward her offspring. Then she turned, and for a split second, looked directly into the camera. Her eyes gleamed like 2 dark coals. Then, with one violent swing of her tail, the screen filled with static. Leo's hand shook as he paused the footage. Oh my God. Mark felt his heart hammer in his chest. He forced himself to breathe, trying to stay calm. "Download it," he said. "All of it. We need to take this straight to the chief." Ramirez wiped sweat from his brow, even in the cold air. "You think she's still down here?" Mark didn't answer. He just kept his light fixed on the nearest tunnel opening, where the water rippled again, stronger this time. A faint sound echoed from the darkness. Not a growl, not exactly. It was more like a hiss mixed with a deep, guttural rumble. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the tunnel itself was holding its breath. Then came another sound. A splash. Close, maybe 50 feet away. "Back! Back now!" Mark barked, raising his flashlight. The beam caught a flash of movement, a dark shape gliding beneath the water. The light reflected off 2 gleaming eyes before vanishing again. Leo stumbled, nearly dropping the monitor. "It's coming this way! Move!" Mark grabbed him by the arm, pulling him toward the ladder. The team sprinted through ankle-deep water as something huge crashed behind them, sending waves slapping against the walls. Metal pipes groaned under the impact. By the time they reached the shaft, the water around their boots began to vibrate, like something massive was pushing through it. Mark shoved Ramirez up first, then Leo. He was the last to climb, his flashlight clipped to his vest, still flickering down the tunnel. For a moment he looked down, and froze. The mother alligator had surfaced halfway down the corridor, her ridged back breaking through the water. She stared up at him, unmoving, unblinking. Then she opened her jaws, revealing rows of glistening teeth. Mark didn't wait to see more. He climbed, faster than he ever had before, until his hands burst through the manhole cover above. Rain and light poured over him as he gasped for air. "Seal it!" he shouted. "Seal the whole damn section!" Within hours, the Department of Sanitation had closed the access points to the central junction. Mark submitted the footage personally to Chief Wallace, who watched the video in silence, his expression shifting from skepticism to horror. When it ended, he looked up at Mark. "This stays classified," he said quietly. "No media, no leaks. We'll call Wildlife Control, maybe the National Park Service. I don't care who. But nobody goes back down there." Mark nodded, but he knew it was too late. The mother wasn't going to stay hidden. Not now that her nest was disturbed. That night, as he drove home, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the technicians monitoring the motion sensors in the tunnels. Alert. Movement detected. Multiple signatures. Location: Sector 5B, South Drainage Line. Estimated size: 9-10 feet. Mark's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. Sector 5B ran directly beneath downtown Brookhaven. Whatever had hatched was spreading. By sunrise, Brookhaven was no longer the calm, bustling city it had been a day earlier. Police barricades went up at intersections. Maintenance hatches were sealed with heavy steel plates. and flashing lights turned downtown into a maze of emergency vehicles. The public didn't know the truth. Not yet. The official statement from City Hall said it was a gas leak beneath the main pipeline. But inside the command center, Inspector Mark Davis stood over a digital sewer map, surrounded by officials who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Chief Wallace's voice was tense. "We've shut down everything from Sector 3 through 8. The pressure systems are offline. Wildlife control's on standby." Mark crossed his arms, staring at the flashing red dots on the screen, each one marking a motion alert from the cameras still functional underground. There were 5 of them. "She's moving east," he said quietly, toward the old water treatment plant. "Or she's hunting," said Dr. Evelyn Harper, the state wildlife biologist flown in overnight. Her expression was grim. 10 feet long, fully grown female. "She's not lost. She's territorial. You went into her nest, and now she's defending it." Mark looked at her. Defending it? She's in the middle of a city. Evelyn met his gaze. That doesn't matter to her. The tunnels are her swamp now. The room fell silent. Outside, the rain was still falling, feeding the sewers with warm runoff. Perfect conditions for an alligator that had adapted to the dark. By noon, the mayor arrived, demanding answers. Wallace presented the evidence: the video of the nest, the footage of the hatchlings, the size estimates. When it ended, the mayor's face was pale. "You're telling me there's a family of these things under our city?" "Yes, ma'am," Mark replied. "At least one adult and several juveniles. They're spreading through the secondary lines." "Then seal the system," the mayor snapped. "Everything. Shut it down." That order triggered the largest citywide operation Brookhaven had ever seen. Power to the sewage network was cut. Workers welded shut access hatches. National wildlife teams arrived with tranquilizer rifles, thermal drones, and reinforced cages. The media tried to get close, but police blocked every approach. Still, whispers leaked online. Sewer creatures, underground monsters, Brookhaven lockdown. Mark, meanwhile, suited up again. He wasn't supposed to go back down, but he couldn't sit behind screens while others risked their lives. He met with Evelyn and 3 trappers from the State Wildlife Unit at the Northern Junction, where an access ladder led directly into Sector 5B, the last known movement zone. "Stay sharp," Mark said as he checked his flashlight and radio. "She's fast, and she's smart. Don't shoot unless you have a clear line." The descent was slow. The air was heavy and hot, humming with the low drone of generators from above. Their boots hit shallow water with a splash. The beams from their flashlights cut through the steam like thin blades. The tunnel stretched ahead, endless and quiet. For 15 minutes, they walked in silence, the only sounds being dripping water and the soft hum of radio static. Then, one of the trappers froze. "Did you hear that?" A faint, rhythmic sloshing echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by a deep growl that rolled through the pipes like thunder. Evelyn raised her tranquilizer rifle, whispering, "She's here." The sound grew louder. Water rippled around their legs. Then, out of the dark, 2 yellow eyes appeared, low to the ground, gleaming with cold intelligence. The trapper on the right panicked and fired. The dart hit the concrete wall. The roar that followed shook the tunnel. "Fall back!" Mark shouted. The mother alligator surged forward, water exploding around her as her massive tail slammed into the floor, sending one man sprawling. Her jaws snapped shut inches from his leg, the echo deafening. Evelyn fired a dart into her side, then another, but the creature didn't stop. She lunged again, teeth glinting in the light, the sound of her hiss reverberating through the tunnel like a scream. Mark grabbed the fallen trapper, hauling him to his feet. "Move! Now!" They sprinted down the corridor, the gator's heavy body smashing through the water behind them. Pipes burst from the impact. The tunnel lights flickered wildly, flashing red as the emergency sensors overloaded. Then, just ahead, another sound. Smaller splashes, higher-pitched screeches. From the side tunnel, 3 juvenile alligators emerged, their scales slick and pale, teeth snapping as they joined the chase. "God! They're everywhere!" Evelyn shouted, firing another tranquilizer dart. "Left turn!" Mark yelled, pointing toward a drainage chamber. They dashed inside and slammed the reinforced gate shut behind them. The metal vibrated violently as the creatures rammed it from the other side. Mark leaned against the wall, chest heaving. "We can't fight her down here. We'll never make it out." Evelyn wiped sweat from her brow. "We don't have to. The sedatives are working. We just need time." Through the gate, Mark could see the mother's form thrashing in the water. Her movements grew sluggish. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she sank beneath the surface, her long tail drifting like a ribbon. The juveniles hissed a few more times, circling her body, then slowly disappeared into the side tunnels. Mark pressed the radio button. "This is Davis. We've got visual on the adult. She's sedated. Repeat, she's down. Send containment now." The response crackled through the static. "Copy that. Hold position. Reinforcements inbound." When they finally emerged hours later, the streets above were silent except for the hum of helicopters. Crews in hazmat suits moved in formation, preparing to haul the massive creature out of the sewer. Reporters shouted questions from behind barricades, but no one answered. As Mark stood near the manhole, rain dripping from his helmet, he watched the team lift the alligator's enormous body from the darkness, over 10 feet long, easily half a ton. Her jaws were bound shut, her eyes half open, her breath slow and heavy. "She's beautiful," Evelyn whispered softly, a strange sadness in her voice. "Yeah," Mark said, staring down at the hole. "And she's not the only one." Because deep beneath the city, in the endless maze of tunnels, more eyes were already watching. 2 days had passed since the Brookhaven tunnels were sealed. The entire sewer network, miles of concrete arteries beneath the city, was now a silent graveyard of darkness and water. On the surface, the headlines called it the Brookhaven Containment Operation. Officials reassured the public that the threat had been neutralized. The captured alligator, the monster of the tunnels, had been transferred to a secure wildlife facility upstate. But Inspector Mark Davis didn't believe it was over. He'd seen too much in those tunnels, too many side chambers, too many branching pipes that stretched into forgotten sections of the old system. The mother was down, yes, but there were others, and Mark couldn't shake the feeling that they were still moving beneath the city. He was back at headquarters late one night, reviewing the motion sensor data from the past 48 hours. Most of the readings were dead. But then he saw it, a faint blip, small but consistent, moving through an abandoned drainage line far from where the adult had been captured. The timestamp, less than an hour ago. Mark's stomach tightened. "Sector 12A," he murmured. That was miles east, a blind zone. He radioed the command desk. "This is Davis. I've got new movement in the tunnels." A bored-sounding operator replied. "Probably just water pressure, sir. We've had false alarms all day." "Not like this," Mark said. "It's rhythmic. It's alive." There was silence on the line, then a sigh. "You're not cleared for another descent, Inspector." Orders from Chief Wallace. Mark stared at the monitor, the tiny red dot pulsing steadily. He'd followed orders his whole career, but not tonight. He grabbed his gear, strapped on his headlamp, and drove to the old maintenance access at the edge of the river. Rain was falling again, cold, heavy, relentless. He climbed down the ladder, one hand gripping the slick metal rung as thunder rolled above. The deeper he went, the fainter the world became, until only the sound of dripping water and the smell of decay surrounded him. His boots hit the bottom with a splash. He switched on his flashlight. The beam cut across the wet concrete, revealing old warning signs and rusted pipes. Everything was still. At first, then came the echo, a faint scrape like claws dragging against the wall. Mark froze, his light darting through the tunnel. Another sound followed, a soft hiss, distant but distinct. "Hello?" he called out, his voice low. The sound bounced back to him, hollow and distorted. He moved forward slowly, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness. Water rippled around his ankles. The smell was worse here, musky, sour, like rotting meat. Then his light hit something ahead, a mound of debris piled against the tunnel wall. He stepped closer. The shape was familiar, woven trash, bones, branches, a new nest, smaller but unmistakable. Mark's pulse quickened. He raised his camera and began recording. "This is Inspector Davis," he whispered. "Sector 12A, northeast drainage line. I've located what appears to be another—" He stopped. Something moved inside the pile. The debris shifted, and out from beneath it crawled a young alligator, maybe 3 feet long. Then another, and another. Their pale scales glistened under the light. But then the water beside him rippled violently. Mark turned and froze. From the dark side tunnel, a massive shape rose slowly from the water. Scales, muscles, eyes that glowed faintly under the beam. The mother he'd seen sedated, or so he'd been told, was standing 10 feet away, fully awake. His breath caught. No, the tranquilizers hadn't killed her. They'd only slowed her down. Somehow, she'd escaped. She stared at him for a long moment, her jaw slightly open, steam rising from her nostrils in the damp air. Her offspring slithered closer, huddling near her legs. Then she took a slow step forward. Mark began backing away, flashlight trembling. Easy. Easy now. But she wasn't backing down. The water around her tail rippled as her muscles tensed. She lunged. The massive tail whipped through the air, shattering the concrete wall beside him. Mark stumbled back, his light spinning wildly. He hit the water hard, pain shooting through his side. In the chaos, his camera slipped from his grip and splashed beneath the surface. He scrambled to his feet, running down the corridor, his boots slapping through the water. Behind him, the creature roared, a low, guttural sound that shook the tunnel. Every few seconds, he'd glance back, catching flashes of scales and teeth in the light. He reached the maintenance shaft and began climbing, 2 rungs at a time. The alligator slammed into the ladder base, shaking it violently. He nearly lost his grip. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he pushed himself higher. At last, he burst through the manhole, collapsing onto the wet pavement. Rain poured down. Lightning flashed across the sky. He rolled onto his back, gasping, staring at the open hole. For a long time, there was only the sound of the storm. Then, faintly, he heard it again. A low hiss, a splash, and then silence. Mark pushed himself up, hands trembling. He slammed the manhole cover shut and locked it with a wrench from his belt. Then he looked toward the river, its dark waters swirling under the bridge lights. Somewhere beneath that surface, she was moving again, deeper, farther, smarter. The next morning, the city announced that all sewer operations would remain suspended indefinitely. Officials confirmed that the captured alligator had been safely relocated to a sanctuary. No mention was made of the second nest, but the workers who stayed late at night began telling stories, of hearing roars echoing through the pipes, of seeing ripples in maintenance pools when no pumps were running, of eyes watching from the grates. And sometimes, on quiet nights after a heavy rain, Mark Davis would walk past the storm drains, hearing that same deep, rhythmic breathing rising from below. Because the truth was never buried. It was waiting. In the dark, beneath the streets of Brookhaven. The queen of the sewers had returned. The alligator family was captured, or so they said. But deep beneath Brookhaven, something still moves in the dark. The queen of the sewers may have never left. If this story gave you chills, hit subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments what you think is still hiding underground.